it's fake?
I'm
Are the
telling you
people
that
that went to jail for
I'm
the
telling you
charges
that
they went to jail for
CNN.
fake?
I'm telling you that CNN. I don't know about that.
I'm sorry, you're not a debater, though?
So I was looking at the New York Post. They've told me that Marjorie Taylor Greene and AOC are going to square off and discuss the Green New Deal like we are going to here. And a lot of people think that's going to be pure cringe, and maybe it's just for ratings, and maybe it is, but I really do think that something good is going to come out of that because it sets an example that people from such polar opposite camps can actually sit down and talk to each other, and it suggests you don't have to treat the other side like a leper colony or that it's immoral to talk to one another. Like personally, I think I'd rather see Greta Thunberg and Alex Jones, but that's just me. But I really do think we're gonna have a substantive debate here with the people we have on, so let's hit it. I wanna start out this way with saying, I wanna ask this question to everyone in the panel, like, where do you think on a scale of 1 to 10, the threat of climate change is, and how good the Green New Deal, fits the bill? So why don't we start with you, Fiorella?
Sure.
Grab the mic.
Oh, there it is. I didn't see it. Okay, so I think that's two separate questions. I think the threat of climate change is significant. However, I think the Green New Deal is a corporate-backed Trojan horse to get the monetization on our natural resources, to get monetization on everything that we deem as beautiful, whether it's animals, the environment, because the people who are behind the Green New Deal are the promoters of the fourth industrial revolution, and they are there to pretty much privatize anything that we deem as valuable. The Green New Deal does not address imperialism. It does not address our war economy. It does not address fracking in its entire sense. It also doesn't account for the economics of how much money we are spending in wind and solar power energy and how much oil it takes to produce those industries. So I think there is a lot of conversation from the left to be had, and people like AOC are there to put a new face, like very similar to what Obama had, that is actually going to take us down the wrong path. And it's just, she's being used to promote this sort of new wokeism that isn't really actually substantiated by anything of value, anything truly pro-environment. It's all a facade in order to get very, very powerful people into the control of everything that we value.
Okay. So that's like 7 and then maybe 0, but from the left.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Destiny, what do you got?
I would say that climate change is a very big deal that we need to be approaching, or that we need to be addressing. I'd give it an 8 out of 10, I guess, for what that's worth. In terms of how the Green New Deal addresses it, I didn't know it was supposed to address every single problem that has ever existed in human history, but I think that it's hard to like quantify like how much it addresses it because there's not very much like specific stuff laid out in it. It's 14 pages long, like you can read it. I like the general goal of it, like the idea of doing some kind of economic reorganization around like the greenifying of U.S. industry or U.S. buildings. I think it's a noble cause. I don't know if there's like enough there to be like, oh, that's a really good idea or a really bad idea, because it really depends on what additional legislation or measures that like actually codify it into law look like. So I'll give it like a tepid, like a 5 out of 10 in terms of like, does it do a good job or not? Because I really wouldn't know until we see how it plays out.
All right. Go ahead, Aaron, starting musician.
Okay, so is this on? I would say, in terms of a threat to our existence, 0, and a threat to our freedom, 9. And as far as does it go, how does it actually address the proposed problem? It doesn't. And I think that's shared, at least so far, with the three of us. It doesn't really specify at all what we're going to do. So I personally disagree on its premise. And so I think a threat to humans and our existence is very low.
Okay.
Well, as an expert on energy, by which I mean I'm energetic, I totally agree with what Fiorella said. I think The biggest thing that we've seen over the last couple of years, and especially the last year in particular, is the merger of big government and big corporation. And that's exactly what this is just furthering. So I think environmentalism is important. We've heard so much gloom and doom and so many predictions that never end up coming true, that at this point I'm sort of just trying to educate myself because I don't know anything and trying to figure out what the facts are. So I'm a little bit undecided, to be honest, on it. But I think in terms of what the Green New Deal does, it's like in school when they would just give you non-applicable or incomplete.
Okay.
It's like worse than zero.
Okay, got it. So for the people over here that are saying that climate change is much more like existential threat, or in this way, and I know, Destiny, you compared it to like the potential threat of nuclear arms or nuclear war.
I didn't say that much, but
Okay, but I heard
I'll take that side, sure, if you want me to. Yeah, I think it's a pretty big threat. Yeah, for sure.
Right, okay. So where are you arriving in that position then?
I didn't know this was a debate on whether or not it was happening. I mean, in terms of, so when people look at, if you look at like the Paris Climate Accords, if you look at like people are looking at adaptation and mitigation, so how do we deal with the damages caused from climate change? I mean, like the biggest worries are that if we get to a point to where flooding occurs, or if certain parts of the earth become like inhospitable because of lack of agriculture or just temperatures that are too hot for people to inhabit, then you start to see migrations from those areas that could cause a lot of turmoil. I mean, we saw what happened in 2013 with the Syrian civil war and all of that migration. And that would pale in comparison to what like a climate migration would look like if we were to get to that point. And then you start to see other places that aren't necessarily equipped to deal with really hot climates are starting to have to deal with not like I'm dying, but like, man, it's really uncomfortable here. Or in some cases, I'm dying. So if you look at places like, nobody here probably lives in London, maybe if anybody has family from like Seattle, places that traditionally aren't equipped to deal with warmer weather are now starting to see, areas where it's like, man, it's 88 degrees outside. I don't really have an air conditioner in my apartment. Like, this is actually starting to become, unbearable. And if we continue in that direction, which everybody says we are, and if you look at like the NASA climate readings and the average surface temperature changes, and the amount of ice that's at the polar ice caps, and the sad videos of the polar bears falling into the ocean and they can't, find their kids, it looks like it's a pretty bad deal.
Okay, but do you trust climate models then? Like, where are you at? I mean, AOC was saying 12-year emergency. Like, what's the level of alarmism that you're at?
You're going to be very disappointed if you expect me to defend anything that she
I'm
says.
not.
Listen, AOC is not a good spokesperson for anything, and I do agree that it has been a huge problem with people like Al Gore coming up and giving us like, in 5 years, we're going to be on the fucking surface of the sun or whatever, and it's like, obviously this hurts our cause, and it gives fodder for people to say like, oh, well, it looks like, if we're not literally melting on the planet, then there must not be a problem at all. So I agree that the alarmism is not good.
Okay, and over here, like you're saying, the Green New Deal doesn't even go far enough. Like, where are you getting that sense of alarm? And
when I say it doesn't go far enough, I mean it actually doesn't address the issues like imperialism, like war. War causes a lot of problems in the climate. It causes mass migration of populations, and it just disrupts the whole ecosystem. When we're also talking about climate change, that isn't even the worst purveyor of the destruction of the environment. You have to look at the farming industry, the meat industry, and how all of that is just being used and exploited and subsidized by our government. Our government is paying these gigantic farms to produce meat at a rate that just is destroying our environment more than anything that people who say they're like, the Sierra Club or the Sunrise Movement, which, by the way, the Sunrise Movement is a subsidiary of the Sierra Club, which means it's a neoliberal giant corporation that really isn't going to do anything to actually solve the problems. You have to look at who's behind the scenes. You have people that work with Google, people that are bankers. They're all having these summits together into how to privatize nature. That's what I mean by it doesn't go far enough, meaning it doesn't really attack the cause of it, the causes that are allowing climate to accelerate. I don't think it's as accelerationist as some people are saying, but I do think they are making this the issue by using people like Greta Thunberg, who they're exploiting as a child, to promote this sort of idea of like, oh, we have to do this, and this is a new way of doing things. If you watch anything, watch the recent conference at Davos with the Great Reset and look at what these people are saying and how they want to proceed. That is a very dangerous route that we're going in, and nobody's really talking about it.
Is your objection, you're saying that some people are looking at this as not a sense to address climate change, but to address jobs or economics, changing the economic system, something like that?
No, I mean, I think we need to address those things, but what they're doing is they're using climate change as the Trojan horse to implement privatization across all industries, and nobody's talking about it from that aspect. And a lot of the left, the progressive left, is just embracing a non-binding resolution, which, by the way, the Green New Deal is a watered-down version of the Green Party's actual Green New Deal. It's a non-binding resolution. It does nothing. Neither does the Paris Climate Accord. The Paris Climate Accord is symbolic at best. If you're looking for solutions, you have to look at how to produce jobs in a sector that can actually replace the jobs that you're going to cut down from oil. And none of these people, these Democrats especially, are actually giving tangible solutions to that, which is why a lot of people on the right always say, well, where are the jobs going to go? Well, you need to address that.
To be clear, I'm pretty sure Biden's infrastructure bill earmarks like hundreds of billions of dollars towards like greenifying like parts of the U.S. economy, whether you're talking like infrastructure, whether you're talking about new jobs created in green energy. So I don't think it's totally fair to say Democrats aren't addressing the jobs part of like green energy at all. Like that bill is a ton marked for like green-related industry.
I don't honestly think it is. I think it's just all talk. I haven't seen Biden in the last 48 years actually like not backtrack from everything he said. He's been lying for the last 48 years. His whole administration is the Obama administration put back in place. They are destroying our foreign policy. They are not going to get out of Afghanistan. They're going to privatize the troops. This is not a man that I trust. And also, by the way, he's not specifying where these jobs are going to go. It's really easy to say, oh, I back union leadership, I back jobs, but then what you're backing is the corrupt union leadership, and you're not doing anything for the workers. And that is also a problem that I see in unions, is like we have to look at how unions have become mini corporations, and that's why a lot of people don't want to join them. We have to address those systemic structural issues that include our infrastructure.
Okay.
While that's true, to be clear, so Biden is talking about a full withdrawal from Afghanistan. Biden was the first senator
Talking about it.
But he
said we'd be
talking
out by
about it.
2014.
I mean, just talking about it is already doing more than Trump did about it. Number two, Biden was the first
Trump
senator.
wanted to remove the troops from Afghanistan.
Trump didn't get us out of any
He got
wars.
opposed
He
by
didn't start any.
neoliberals.
Yeah, so now we're in it.
To be clear, Trump controlled all halves of government, both halves of government,
So
okay,
did-
and the
so did the
president.
Democrats.
So I'm just going to pull us out of, I'm going to use the Star Trek transporter, pull us out of Afghanistan and back to Kenosha.
It's fascinating that a man that said he could do so much has so many people lined up to make excuses for his ineptitude. I mean, I don't know what to
Not
say.
making
Like,
excuses for
If the
Trump. I don't think
ineptitude is
Trump did
starting
enough.
wars, I'm glad that he didn't do anything.
yeah, I mean,
All right,
yeah,
so on a scale of 1 to
yeah.
10, like, how much do we hate Biden, right? I think they're 10, 0,
Infinity.
5. But okay, I mean, let's kind of put that aside and get back. Aaron, you must not trust the models a little bit on climate change because you don't think that it's that big of a deal. You don't like the Green New Deal's address. Like, where are you getting that?
Yeah, so that's right, and you don't have to take my word for it. So there's a lot of misinformation around this issue, and I've worked in the industry my whole career, and you are not getting the truth. So if you can take away one thing today, take away that. But what I would agree with is this is, you call it Trojan horse, I say a compelling event. Like, I think it's clear from the discussion so far that the objective is not primarily the environment at all. And so if the true objective is some of these other things, don't you start to wonder why, should there be a good reason for this, and is that compelling event sound? And there are a lot of leading experts, if we are using the common phrase these days, trust the science, that this is not settled science. And if you need some references, I can provide some of those, but I think that's important. Like, we should, especially if it's going to have these far-reaching consequences, like, we should feel confident in the reason we're doing this, and I don't. And so I guess that's my comment.
Where are you on what the salient effects of climate change? Like, you're not saying that CO2 levels aren't rising or the pH of the ocean isn't changing. You're just saying it's not anywhere near a critical level.
So yes, I guess what I am bothered most by is the catastrophic nature, that kind of description. And we've already talked about it. We've just said the predictions have been happening for decades, that we shouldn't be here having this conversation. And here we are. So then you have to, and when it happens over and over, like one of my core duties is in forecasting. And like if I did that at work, I wouldn't have a job. And so like at some point you have to think like, do I have the whole story? And then it's becoming harder and harder to get the true story, that's for sure. And I think it's not unlike a lot of the panels we have today, a lot of these topics, it's hard to find the information, but I just encourage everyone to take the decision-making back into your own hands and say, I can think about this and let me go find what I need to feel comfortable, especially when like these are big things that are being proposed under the premise of something that is not settled.
Where do you suggest to find it? Like, where are you getting it from? Because, I mean, what, you just Googling that? I mean, you're going to get nothing but like heavily biased sites. Where are you
Yeah,
getting
I think if you want quick information, I would highly recommend a guy by the name of John Robson. He's a Canadian guy, and he's got a lot of good sort of small bites on this material. And then he cites a lot of sources. You can go get the raw data from there. But the IPCC, which is sort of the foundation of the Green New Deal, the first sentence says, all of this stuff we're going to talk about after that's not really related to the climate at all is hanging on this one report from the IPCC, and that should be called into question. I mean, you should at least feel confident in it. And there's another guy, and now his name escapes me, who's a physicist, and he actually was part of the Obama administration, and he has just published or is about to publish a book called Unsettled on this topic. So he and a team of scientists, physicists, went and studied these assumptions that are in the IPCC report. And you know, the conclusions are not what's being publicized. So it's hard to get because a certain narrative is being pushed, and I think for the reasons you guys mentioned. But the book is actually called Unsettled. So I think it's a lot of these things aren't as settled as they are portrayed.
Do you have anything to add, Mike?
Yeah, I think that's very accurate. This seems like a bit of a controversial thing that you're not allowed to say these days, but I don't think that we're necessarily in the worst spot in terms of reducing carbon. We've led the world in it. In the last 20 years, we've reduced carbon emissions more than the next 12 countries combined. And I just can't imagine the balls that it takes for someone to stand in front of your face and tell you that the world is going to end in 9 years. And I think that says a lot about the education system and how misinformed a lot of people are, that they don't get laughed off the stage. But I think a lot of people at a certain point don't really know what to think, because whether it's climate change, whether it's COVID, no matter what it is, there have been a lot of studies shown where in all of these issues, people on the left will vastly overestimate the threat of something. If you ask them how many unarmed black people are killed by police every year, they think that number is in the thousands. If you ask them, climate change, they think it's a much bigger threat. If you ask them how many people are dying of COVID, they think it's way more. So I think it's just an overall picture of everything being this catastrophe that's not quite accurate.
And I guess I would add, you started, I think, by saying we're not in that bad of a position in terms of emissions or things that, that are thrown around on the topic, but I would say we are in an excellent position for human life in a lot of ways, and that is enabled by energy, and I will say by fossil fuels. And so really, there are no other industries, or I would challenge you to come up with another industry that is not enabled by energy, and in a lot of ways by fossil fuels. And so even our freedom, freedom of movement, freedom of innovation, you don't have the luxury of doing these things and developing new technology and saving lives and treating people medically and educating people without energy. And so if we're going to talk about any negative impacts, we should also be considering that. That's a huge value, and especially if you want to make things better, because a lot of talking points are new technology, new technology. You can't develop new technology, you can't innovate unless you have access to energy. And of course, you can drill down into what type of energy, but it's an important part for me that the sort of benefits we get from it and the importance of energy.
Okay, so kind of implied in that is that the green tech isn't there.
The degree in what?
The green technology isn't there. It sounds like you're saying that green tech, as it exists right now, is simply not enough to power and won't be. That seems
That's
like
why we incentivize it, right? I mean, green energy has made leaps and bounds in terms of productivity, in terms of cost per kilowatt hour. Like if you try to Google around for price of solar energy, people are like trying to figure out in 2019 and in 2020, how did it come down so much? Like you're getting to like 4 cents, 3.6 cents per kilowatt hour for solar energy, and it's unbelievable. I think they're trying to turn on like the largest and cheapest solar farm that's ever been made in Southern California right now. And then as they deploy more and more of these solar farms, like the cost just continues to come down.
Is that without subsidies?
That's as all of these government subsidies are coming off. I think it's a very interesting position to take to talk about the importance of freedom. On one hand, we need the freedom to do all these things. And then on the other hand, we talk about how upset we are that we're so involved in the Middle East. And you can't really disaggregate our involvement there from things like energy issues. And the last time I checked, we never went to Iraq or Afghanistan to pick up a solar panel or to take a wind farm away from Syria or something. I think that in some ways, green energy doesn't just represent like a better environment or cleaner air or no global warming. It also represents a great degree of freedom, I think, as well, which is something that oftentimes people overlook.
So I guess back to your point, I would ask how you define green energy and what we're considering in that basket, because a lot of times it goes to solar and wind, and we forget the elephant in the room that's nuclear, but which is arguably the cleanest source out there. And then with respect to the Middle East and something that's mentioned earlier, fracking, I will just say that today our imports from the Middle East are single-digit %. And it didn't used to be that way, and that is largely in thanks to the technology development called fracking, which is maybe one of the most important technologies that we've seen in the past couple of decades for our country.
So where is our energy independence and security with fracking and finding with those ways of getting extra oil? How would you assess our energy independence?
Yeah, so we are not energy independent, and I guess by the way I would look at it, we haven't been. I guess the claim was in 2019 that we became energy independent because our production outstripped our consumption, and that's true, and our exports were higher than our imports. But the energy industry is complex, and so we still are importing over 5 million barrels per day of crude oil, and we need to in order to refine it in our system here. So that this is one maybe gap, I think, in our U.S. refining capabilities. But I will say that almost 70% of that comes from Canada. So and that's related to the type of oil that they produce. But we have a tremendous amount of resources, but by what I would consider independent, not yet.
Right. Is nuclear energy green?
I think nuclear energy is a tremendous improvement over other fossil fuels. Nuclear energy also addresses kind of there's a problem with solar and wind in that you can't really scale these up and down to meet the demand of a grid, and nuclear enables you to do that. We still have long-term storage problems that we don't have good solutions to yet, but personally, I consider something like nuclear to be superior to other fossil fuels available. That being said, nuclear faces a challenge in that it usually takes you, I think it's around a decade to recoup the cost of the construction of a nuclear reactor, and oftentimes, for better or for worse, environmental groups will put up significant roadblocks during this construction that makes the process even more expensive. So things like natural gas are becoming far more lucrative because the return is so much more immediate than on nuclear power plants, unfortunately.
Okay, you live in California, right? And they're shutting down Diablo Canyon, which is the last nuclear plant you guys have there, and is 9 or 10% of all of California's energy. Are you cool with that? Because that's already built.
No, I mean, I think nuclear is just, I wish they had a different name for it. Honestly, it's just a scary thing. People hear nuclear and they just go crazy over it. But considering the threat to human life, the threat to the environment, if you hear about some nuclear disaster, everybody in here knows Chernobyl with a nuclear power plant. Everyone here knows 3 Mile Island, Fukushima. But how many people even remember the BP oil spill? It feels like incidences related to other types of energy that aren't nuclear are forgotten so much quicker. But man, anything goes wrong with nuclear anywhere around the world, and we remember it forever. It's just the scariest thing in the world. And then there's also the misconception that a nuclear reactor at any point in time will become a nuclear bomb. If it goes wrong, oh my God, we have a whole nuclear explosion here. And then you also ignore a whole bunch of the improvements that have been made to nuclear energy. A lot of the reactors in the US are 30, 40 years old. These are very, very old reactors. We've got much better better ways of building them now. The types of nuclear reactors that we build now are the medium through which the energy is produced is like if it wears off, it's also the coolant, so you don't get these runaway nuclear reactions. Nuclear energy is awesome. I wish we had more of it. It's just
Okay. So you want to see nuclear energy?
Everybody should want to see. Literally, conservatives should like it because I get to make fun of people that like wind farms and solar panels. Left-leaning people should like it because they can make fun of coal plants or whatever. Like nuclear should be like the go-to win for everybody.
So I agree with a lot of these points. And I work in the fossil fuel part of energy, but no, I think nuclear is an excellent option for the reasons you stated, but also when you talk about trying to replace something like oil or gas for its primary use, solar and wind can't do it, and I would venture to say they never will. But nuclear can scale, and it can, you can get a lot closer to a large portion of energy. I mean, we have, I think, 3 states in the U.S. that have more than 50% of their power coming from nuclear. So it's possible to scale this up. Solar and wind are much lower than that, especially on the national scale. We're talking single-digit percentage. But I would just sort of remind that in terms of like transportation energy, the fuel you put in your car, the fuel you use for airplanes, but also international commerce, that a lot of that is done by ship, so bunker fuels. This comes from oil. You can't have, you can develop other ways to transport, but that one isn't as easy to replace one-to-one like coal or gas for electricity generation. So, but nuclear is a good option for a large.
Fiorella, are you down with fission?
Actually, I live in Southern California as well, and a lot of people are very much anti-nuclear energy. I think the key to all of this is understanding that all of these produce a threat. Whether it's solar or wind, you're still going to need oil. So people have to be honest when they're, I'm a proponent of hemp, of solar energy, of wind energy, of lithium, new technologies. But in order to invest in those technologies, you have to also understand that it's going to require you to likely use something you don't like, whether it's nuclear or oil. Once we get to that point, you can't expect that to happen overnight. And I think people have to have more honest conversations as to how that's going to happen instead of just saying, well, we're going to say no to everything. That is, you don't have a proper protocol as to how to achieve this and how to achieve it also in an economic sector where people are going to have to figure out where they're going to work in these new industries and how you're going to put the population back to work. I think that's very key in having the honest conversations instead of just saying no to every single thing that you hyper-partisan were told to not accept.
I don't understand what their opposition even is to nuclear. Like, I haven't seen any real evidence that there's some major threat posed by it. So what's it, just a financial thing, or?
The long-term storage right now is the only thing that we haven't figured out.
Just what he mentioned, the possibility of just radioactive and just cancerous elements, destruction to the sea. A lot of people feel like that could potentially be a disaster in surrounding communities. There's, especially in Southern California.
Yeah. Oh, that.
Yeah, I think that also has been a little bit misrepresented in terms of safety. And this is, again, coming from someone in a different part of the industry. But if you look at it sort of on casualties, even including these big disasters, casualties per unit energy, it's thousands of times safer than traditional oil and gas, And so yeah, I think there's a little bit of misrepresentation there, too.
Okay. Like, Destiny, where do you want to be? Like, what climate change metrics do you want to get to? Do you like what the Paris Climate Accord is doing, Biden's new plan? Do you think that's accurate? How would you tweak it if you were on the advisory committee?
So these international accords, as was rightly pointed out, don't really have enforcement mechanisms. The goal right now is you get like something in place, and then you get to like basically politically bully people into saying like, hey, you're not meeting your obligation, like I don't know how I feel about that, and then you start to apply political pressure that way. In terms of like actually getting, one thing that I like about the Paris Climate Accords is it points to something that is, to my understanding, the only thing that's been shown, demonstrated as government policy to actually affect carbon emissions, and that's like these forms of carbon trading systems. So the idea that like if you pollute more, then you pay more for it. One of the biggest problems that we have with pollution is that it's free. Like if you pollute, you don't pay anything for it. And so if you have a way of manufacturing something that leads to a lot of pollution, you might as well engage in that behavior because you get, there's no reason not to. But I think that pushing people towards kind of this like global market of buying and selling carbon credits, I think would be a good step towards kind of pushing people into being a little bit more aware of how much they're polluting.
Right. How do we get China to play ball on that?
Well, one of the nice things about the Paris Climate Accords is that unlike the Kyoto Protocol that preceded it, is that the Paris Climate Accords, there's a much blurrier distinction between developing nations and I don't want to first world nations, but developed nations, I guess. So prior to this, like the Kyoto Protocol was heavily criticized because India and China are basically completely let off the hook. And if you're the United States, okay, maybe at one point in time, China, you're growing, that's fine. But now it's like, okay, well, hold on, you guys got to play by the same rules. Something that the Paris Climate Accords try to do is they try to get all of the more developed nations to buy in through a series of kind of like loans or grants so that developing nations don't have to just suffer because they're not allowed to pollute their way to development like we did. But it also still tries to hold them accountable by forcing them to put forth their own plans to reducing their emissions.
Okay. So you just want to change up who gets developed nation status and who doesn't?
Well, no, ideally you want everybody to become a developed nation, but you can't tell developing nations you're not allowed to pollute like we did,
Right.
so there has to be some kind of compensation for it.
Right, yeah. But yeah, China is the big one. And I suppose India, where do you put them?
In terms of what?
A developing nation?
They're a developing nation. I think they're I think per head, I think they're the second most polluting nation behind the U.S. Or I think third if you include like all of the European, I think it's the EU together. There might be another thing. But like, yeah, they're a massive polluter, obviously, in terms of absolute and in terms of relative value, yeah.
Aaron, what do you think? I mean, is this going to work with some kind of like trading caps, like globally? Like if we were going to do it, like assuming that the government is moving in that direction to where they want to address climate change to a certain amount, like what do you think of like Destiny's idea?
Okay, so one thing that popped into my head, so I'm not a big fan of the system for a couple of reasons, but one thing that popped into my head is like the mention of if you pollute, you don't pay for it. And it's like, okay, if you have a discrete pollution event, you certainly pay for that. And I mean, you can go through all the examples of that. And then you're talking sort of, oh no, I mean like the stuff that you don't, we sort of just think is happening out there, and these models predict and stuff like that, which comes back kind of to the premise. But even if you say that, like, okay, you don't pay at the pump, you're not sort of compensating the cost you pay for that gallon for the total emissions that aren't, the cost isn't captured there, so we have to put a number to it. I think it's, again, a bit of a dangerous imbalance because there are a lot of benefits you get too that you also aren't charged for there in terms of having the energy efficiency in the total human system. And I get back to like innovation and things like that. So freedom of transport. There's no sort of like tax. Like I like to be able to see my family, so there's pay a little bit more for that. So it's kind of an imbalanced cost benefit, I think, if you're talking about that. But then you also, I think, see some kind of redistribution. If you start these systems, you see companies that, and it's happening already, emerge out of essentially thin air because we've developed a system that's paper. It's like derivatives trading and things like that. But so I think that opens up to a little bit of corruption in terms of just trading the credits and not actually doing anything, and you get some kind of credit for, let me see if I can come up with an example, credit for preventing future pollution or something like that. And it's like, that didn't ever actually happen, so is that really something that you can quantify in terms of money? So I don't know. It's a system for me that is open to a certain level of corruption, so not a fan.
That immediately sounds like a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, so I mean, like, immediately on its face, so you do pay for the benefit of filling up the pump when you buy a car. Like, the reason why you buy a car, ostensibly, is to drive around with it. So you pay for the car, you get the benefit of the car, you pay for gas, you get the benefit of the gas. The problem is that what's created when we pollute is, we call these discrete events, but outside of, like, literally throwing, a piece of trash in your driveway, unfortunately, pollution is oftentimes very generalized, and oftentimes not even localized. So you run it, so, like, one of the biggest polluting things that you can do as a person is flying an airplane. So I flew an airplane to get here. I'm not paying the cost of any of that pollution. You know, maybe some level of pollution was put in the air, but I don't feel that at the end of the day. Same thing with driving a car. You know, unless you're leaving your car on in your garage, which I hope none of you do, you know, you're not going to like notice that you're driving around and polluting. So I think the idea is that if there's going to be like these negative events that are created that we can't like feel the repercussion of, there needs to be like a dollar cost associated with it, so that we can incentivize people towards more activity that kind of isn't that isn't as polluting. I guess. I guess I look at it in terms of like a parent, you know, talking to a child. You know, why do you leave your light on every night? Well, because they don't pay for it. You know, which is honestly the reason why they do it. But if you start charging a kid for electricity in your room, you see them change. Or if you punish them for it, you know, you see that behavior change and adapt to the punishment that's being put now on the waste of energy.
Yeah, I think I get the argument. I disagree a little bit on the premise because it's sort of assuming there is this negative impact that I from what I have read and studied is not necessarily there in the sense that it needs to be sort of punished.
Well, do you think that carbon is increasing in the atmosphere?
It is measurably, yeah.
Do you think that that might have any impact on global temperatures?
I think it certainly can.
So isn't that something we should therefore reduce?
Why?
So that we don't increase global temperatures?
Why?
So that we don't cause the rising of the sea level, which would cause mass migration away from places that are close to sea level, so that we don't change our the agriculture we have across the planet and make certain crops like untenable in certain lands, and so that we don't make certain spots of the planet inhospitable because the temperatures are too high for us to efficiently cool them?
Yeah, so this is where it breaks down because you can't say that those things will happen. In fact, it's been said those things should have already happened and they haven't. And when you see the breakdown of these models and the assumptions, if I'm convinced that's happening, you don't sort of want to head straight for that, but that's a bit of misinformation on these consequences of that you're describing, sea levels and things like that. So
Okay, so I'm curious. Would you say, I'm trying not to lead too much, would you say that liberal academia or maybe more woke-skulled progressive assholes, can I swear here?
Yeah, you just did.
These kind of like progressive woke-skulled assholes have kind of like pressured and bullied maybe people in government to kind of have this agenda related to climate change that maybe it's not for the best of industry and everything, but we're kind of being pushed there by kind of radicals in government?
100%.
Okay, if you believe that, how can you explain the massive investment we see in green energy from like authoritarian regimes like China that don't have to bend to that same political pressure?
I can tell you exactly why China, because the U.S. holds 4 times the reserves of natural gas and oil that China does, and twice the coal. But if we're forced into renewable energies, 90% of rare earth metals are in China, at least the ones that are commercially producible today. So, I mean, like, that's clear.
But why is China deploying as part of their own energy grid these massive solar farms or these massive offshore wind farms? Like, why does China?
Because it's good business for them.
Even locally? So. Like I'm trying to figure out like why, if it's so powerful, if it's so good to use fossil fuels, if they have all of this fuel, if they've got all these rare earth metals, if they've got all this stuff, why would China? Where is the political pressure for them coming to pursue like this kind of model for climate, or for energy, I guess?
So I think the motives of China are probably complex, but you also just made the argument that China is polluting more and more every day, and they're burning all this coal, which they are. So it's not like they are transitioning all of their coal production over to solar and wind, but it is definitely in their best interest for the developing world to move that way, especially the U.S.
Well, I guess why? So obviously China is polluting more, not because they've just decided to pollute more, but as their middle class grows, especially after the 90s, more and more people are getting access to first world standards of living. They're starting to use more products that consume electricity, energy, et cetera. So of course they are polluting more, but they are moving more and more into green energy as well. I'm just trying to figure out if in the United States we only do this because of political pressure, and in China where they're a lot more resistant because of their form of government to political pressure, why do we see them making these same movements towards green energy? Like, shouldn't they just be polluting away fossil fuels and just exporting all the green energy to the U.S. because we're suckers because of the left? Or
Yeah, and I think generally they are, although I don't have these transition numbers on how, do you know like what sort of contribution to their total power stack is coming from wind or solar? I don't know that for China. But the general trend is that's exactly what they're doing. So that's.
But are you thinking that like China, it's in their best national interest to go green? That way they don't get cut off from oil if like the Europe and the U.S. like decide to like shut them down?
So I mean, back to some of the comments I made before, what do you mean by green? And you can't go entirely green in a lot of these cases. So it's like you can have both, and what is in their best interest
But I mean
for
by
them
green
or
is
for
like
us?
pushing electric cars and that kind of that tech.
For them, yes, all of that kind of energy storage, battery components, and the storage capabilities you need for these unreliable sources like solar and wind to a certain extent, they have the market on that. So it is in their best interest to drive that up. That doesn't mean they're going to stop doing other things, but yes, that's in their best interest.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say I agree with both of you. Like, I think it is in their best interest to do it. They have cornered the market on it, but that means that it is absolutely possible for us to do that as well. And I think they're ahead. I mean, you have high-speed trains in China. You have transportation systems that are far more advanced than ours. It's their infrastructure that they've adapted really well to, something that we could learn from, that I don't think really gets talked about. The infrastructure of the United States does contribute a lot to the climate issue, how we structure the systems, the grids, and all of that. And I think China has actually been able to smartly have a quasi-capitalist system in its own economics where they can actually make money off of being quote unquote green. Obviously, you're right, they're still using oil for those for the production of wind and solar, but they are figuring out ways to start to move away from sole dependence on oil, which I think is something that we could learn from.
Okay, Mike.
What was the question again? I feel like we've gone in a circle
Okay.
from here. I don't even know what we're talking about.
We might have. But where do you want to, like,
What was it?
are you, do you want to comment, or I can shift it? Okay. So, are you worried about, like, climate change being used as almost leveraged by Davos and sort of part of the Great Reset as a narrative only for some other nefarious means, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's what they're trying to do. Is they are propping up characters like Greta Thunberg. Greta Thunberg is, I think, a genuine person. I think there's a manipulation by people to use the face of youth. The Sunrise Movement, like I said, is directly tied to NGOs. Their finance disclosures are, like, if you look through them, there's tied to not just multinational corporations, but like the Sierra Club, which doesn't do anything environment-wise. And when you talk to the Sierra Club about the farming industry and the exploitation of land and how much land that takes and what that does to our environment, they won't talk to you. And that's the thing. Like, they're not really looking for solutions. They're looking for privatization, and they want to manufacture consent for this privatization by putting on the guise of being green and pro-environment without actually doing anything to find solutions. And where this basically is going to take us is to this this technocratic panopticon of this era where we have emergence of big tech with the corporate sector and our government that is going to censor everybody that is trying to talk about these things. I mean, you can't even talk about the Great Reset. And there's literal videos on this all over the internet. And it's being, propped up as a conspiracy theory by a lot of people when it's actually out there. And what you have to always look at when you look at the environmentalism, you have to look at who's behind this, who benefits from these things. If the people aren't benefiting, then you have to really take a step back and really see what their purpose is. And their purpose, of course, is to make money, but we're not all going to see the benefits of all those investments.
And robot dog policemen, for sure, too.
That part.
Okay. Destiny, do you buy it? Do you think that's, like, what she's saying, like, this being manipulated in that way? Or that's the goal?
I'm not there's a lot to unpack there. I don't even know
I have
which.
a comment.
Is there kernel of truth of what she's saying there?
I mean, there's a kernel
or
of truth
none at all?
to flat earthers. I mean, it depends on what. I mean, like,
I
not to
have
say
some
that this is on the
comments.
level of flat earthers, but I mean, like, I think that, like, first of all, even the concept of a great reset isn't necessarily that bad. It's interesting that we, like, turn off our brains, I guess, when we think of government policy. If you're a small business owner, right, or a business owner at all, like any problem represents an opportunity. If it is the case that we need like some great level of reinvestment or some massive level of government spending or some type of stimulus to get certain projects off the ground, I don't think it's bad to take a look at like, well, maybe there's a more efficient way that we can allocate these projects, or maybe there are different ways that we can distribute like the contracts or something to society. Like necessarily that's going to be the case. In terms of like, does this benefit big business? I mean, everything the government does is going to benefit big business because the businesses are already big, of course. Like disproportionately speaking, like they're going to be benefited more than anything else that government does. If you talk about corporate tax cuts, the big businesses are going to be more represented. If you talk about any type of like assistance to businesses, large businesses are going to be represented. In terms of, you know, I don't know anything about the Sierra Club.
That's not good for the environment.
Well, it depends on what you're talking about. So you talk about farming a lot. When it comes to agriculture, big business is crucial for the environment because nothing is worse for the environment than small farmers. Small farmers are some of the most destructive. I don't know if we're going to talk about India later, but small farmers that do their own thing, the monocultural crops, the planting just one type of crop over and over again, the setting the fields on fire when you're done with it, the robbing of the fields of nutrients, the horrible use of pesticides to grow one crop over and over again. When you look at like a big business and you apply it to agriculture, your environmental outcomes are actually way better than these individual family farms. So it just depends on what you're looking at when you say, I just don't like it feels like very Bernie-esque to be like big business bad for environment or big business bad, when it's like, well, we need to like qualify that a little bit more, I think.
I mean, how many small businesses are even going to be left after the last year and however long this goes on? So, I mean, that's what this whole thing is about, is the consolidation of power. There's going to be nothing but a handful of corporations soon.
And I would say that some of these green energy companies are now, you know, in terms of market cap, rivaling the size of what we call the super majors, the Exxon and the Chevron. They're bigger. So if you want to talk about big business, it's not, you know, I mean, it's across the board, or it can be found in a lot of places. But I wanted to make a comment on one thing you mentioned. You said you can't even talk about certain topics, Great Reset or whatever it is. You can't even talk about climate change. And when you say we know it's being used to push forward things that aren't related, and you say, I see all these other places that I can't talk about things, COVID, Great Reset, or however you want to put it, whichever examples you want to come up with, you can't talk about climate change either and say, you know, it's not exactly settled. But, you know, it's a certain kind of problem that's put, and I just had to look up the exact title because there's a book out now called Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom, and that's written by Patrick Moore. Maybe somebody is aware of it. He's a co-founder of Greenpeace, and he's done like the research around using things like this, like COVID, like climate catastrophe, which is a little bit different than some of the other things we've been talking about, to push forward things like this. And I think that we should take back our ability to think about things on our own and find the information and make the decisions and say we don't quite agree if we don't agree.
And it's always the things that give them more power and control and money that we can't discuss.
And things you can't really observe, or it's very hard to challenge. And so like then you gotta work a little bit harder, but I think then it just is a little bit more of a red flag. So I think it's worth the effort to look into it.
But do you think that, let's talk about India, that is there a downside then? I don't know if that's true, like where you're getting that, but I mean, that makes some sense that, yeah, a bigger farm, you massive this out, maybe they're doing less pollution. Now, what specific kind of pollution are you talking about? And is that a threat? Like, if you're going to just have these giant companies and you're taking out all the little guy, I mean, isn't that balance of power in production a good thing?
I mean, but that's a complicated question in terms of like what kind of government you want, what kind of like economic organization you want. I mean, some might argue that with large corporations, they should be run by workers. You've got like socialists will argue that. Some people would argue that things like lobbying ought to be banned because corporations have a disproportionate amount of power when it comes to representation in front of the government. Other people like Biden himself might argue that like labor unions need to be strengthened so that we have more negotiating power, at least in the workplace, against these companies. I think that anytime somebody sells you a grand narrative around a topic where they have like one thing is the problem and they've got like one or two experts that they point to that will tell you all about it, I think it should like set some alarms off in your head in terms of what's going on. This idea that like, you can't talk about any topic, I mean, you can. There's plenty of conversation that goes on about it. It's just not that many people are interested in talking about it.
But it could get your YouTube channel demonetized.
What?
It could get your YouTube channel demonetized.
Yeah, possibly, sure. But I mean, like all of these critiques, when we talk about things like getting demonetized and all of that, Like, these are interesting conversations to have, but people sometimes want it both ways. You get like, no offense, but you'll get like Republicans that will champion the free market over and over again. Demonetization is downstream from free market economics. That's exactly what that is. That's Google exercising their First Amendment rights to make as much money as they want off of your videos in order to sell advertisements, and they'll censor certain topics doing it. And if you don't like that, that's fine. But
Google has
Just build your own
governmental
internet.
power.
God.
Google isn't just a small business exerting its power. Google is a multinational corporation that has direct government influences with Susan Wojcicki and YouTube, and the money that they've donated, over $16 million to the Joe Biden administration, comparatively a few million to the Trump administration. You can't tell me that when you can't even talk about Hunter Biden Burisma, when you can't talk about the elections on these giant social media platforms that have become the public square, that that's simply a small business or a business enacting its power. That is directly coordinating with the government at play.
And when the government is locking you down in your home and you're not allowed to speak online, aren't these corporations in some way de facto state actors?
So what's the solution then? Do you think that big businesses shouldn't exist? Do you think that capitalism shouldn't exist? Do you think that all of these should be nationalized or expropriated? Or
My
what do you?
personal ideology is irrelevant. I think we need
Well,
to
no,
defend...
it's very relevant, because everything that you're giving right now is, these are fair critiques, but these are critiques of capitalism. These aren't critiques of Google. These aren't
No,
critiques
they're
of.
critiques of, well, they're
They're
critiques,
critiques of
both.
corporatism.
No, they're critiques of corporatism is the natural end to capitalism. Anytime you amass capital as an individual, you use capital to buy more capital, and anytime you have a political system that allows you to use that capital to get time with any type of senator or lawmaker, then your end result is always going to be some form of corporatism. You can't pretend to be a capitalist and not say that big corporations are okay.
If YouTube and Google were to be fair, that would be one thing, but they're not. They only go after certain people and certain groups based on ideology.
But why do they only go after some ideologies?
Because they are painting it as misinformation when in
Because
fact
there's more money there.
it is.
That's why.
Correct, but it's based on the fact of who is influencing our government. These technocratic corporations are working in tandem with our government to promote a certain narrative, and if you stand outside that narrative, they're silencing your voice because you are threatening that narrative.
Yeah,
and
and
that's
socialists
what's
have
happening.
complained about this for the past, 80 years in the United States. My question is, so what is your solution to that? Or I'm not asking for a holistic solution, but what would you change?
I would change the fact that companies like Twitter and Google should either stop being both publishers and authors, or should just become a complete act as the public as the public town square. That's what they've become.
So if somebody wants to post death threats on Google, on Twitter, if they want to post, do you think that?
I'm talking about
Death
First
threats are-
Amendment. I'm talking about censorship. If you are inciting a threat, that is for the courts to decide. You don't get to decide what is misinformation. Neither does Twitter. Neither does Facebook. Neither do Silicon Valley executives.
So if you have a website, let's say that you make a website and you want to host certain types of content on that website, you should now be forced by the federal government to host every single person that wants to post on that site now. You have no ability now to ban certain
You're
people.
comparing me to Google. That's not the same thing.
Okay, so how big do you have to be before the federal protections kick in and you lose your First
Big
Amendment
enough
right?
to donate $16 million to the
Is 16
Biden
million the
administration.
cutoff? Like-
No, I'm talking about, obviously, I don't have the wealth of influence that Google and YouTube and Twitter have on our government. You can watch the hearings where they go and these congressmen demand that these executives go and become the police of the internet.
I don't think the connection works exactly that way. But.
There was a person approached by the sheriff, the LA sheriff, for a tweet they did against Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. There was another person that was approached by law enforcement for a tweet they did against Ted Cruz, and another person, this is happening right now. You cannot say anything about COVID. You cannot say anything about election fraud. You cannot say anything that is remotely threatening to the narrative, and they're using the under the guise of misinformation and Russia and all this bullshit that has been completely just debunked to go after people who are trying to tell the truth. And I have my channel demonetized for merely interviewing somebody that, Ryan Christian from The Last American Vagabond, who was talking about COVID, and we just asked him a couple questions, and we got our video taken down. There is so much censorship that you are just saying, oh, it's a private company. This is no longer the case. We could sit down and argue about it and find solutions, but it's not as simple as saying, oh, that's just a byproduct of capitalism.
I'm sorry, but it absolutely is.
Well,
and
then I guess you have to become an anti-capitalist then to find a solution.
And if that's the case, that's fine. I just wish people were more honest about it. I'm very empathetic to arguments about censorship online, believe me. So I definitely understand the pain of being demonetized on platforms or being attacked by certain people as a result of things things that you've said online, but this is a critique that is levied at the system. And it is very frustrating to me that certain people in this country have advocated on behalf of workers' rights or protected classes or all sorts of other things, or even when it comes to polluting in rivers or in different environments, where people are saying, hey, these corporations have too much power. These corporations are too strong. They're destroying our environment. They're destroying our workplace. They're destroying our cities and towns. What do we do about it? And the Republican response for decades, for my entire lifetime, was, oh, well, go start your own city. Oh, well, go start your own thing. Oh, well, why don't you do that? And it's like, okay, well, why don't you, well, hold on. So why don't you go start your own social media? You know, how's Gab going? You know, how are any of the alternative social media platforms going, right? Obviously, it's a lot more difficult. And the most frustrating thing is that in the past, people were complaining about like losing their jobs or losing their entire form of existence
Right.
in some of these cities. And people just, oh, well, go move, go work somewhere else. You guys lose your Twitter accounts, and now you're marks. Now you're ready to socialize, you know, Google, and you're ready to socialize Facebook, and you're ready to put all these government restrictions. It's like, I wish you guys would have come around a little bit earlier.
There
Like,
are people
geez.
getting banned from banking. Like the fact that it's not about Twitter. Nobody gives a damn about Twitter. It's the fact that is step one, which is we are clearly seeing it spread everywhere else now. And I don't give a damn what Republicans did 20, 30 years ago. They sucked then, they suck now. I wasn't a Republican then. I care about what they do now. And what I see now is liberals time and time and time again taking the side of corporations can do whatever they want and having no problem with that. So if you are against big businesses being totally free to do whatever, then do something about it.
If you want people to stop discriminating against each other, you know what? I can get on board with that. I hope you feel as strongly about Twitter or Wells Fargo allowing people to have accounts there as you do about, you know, certain shops, you know, cooking cakes for gay people.
Well,
That's all I'm saying.
there's got to be.
It's not the same thing.
Okay, but there's got to be less hypocrisy on both ends. I agree. That is hypocritical of some people on the right to talk about censorship and then want other people they don't agree with censored. But I honestly am seeing it a lot more on the liberal left. I'm not a liberal. I'm a leftist. So I don't like to be put in that category because I see a lot of authoritarianism stemming from liberals and people like the new wave of progressives like the Squad who are literally telling people, hey, go police everybody, go rat on your neighbors, go do this, go do that. They were supposed to be the people that stood against authoritarianism, that stood against censorship, and now all I see is an embracing of that whole narrative to go and tell on your neighbors if they were at the Capitol on January 6th. I think we have seen these extremities come from the left, not just the right, and I think it's fair to say that there are hypocrites on both sides, but that's not a solution. The solution is to actually act on it.
Real quick, to make it germane to climate change, Aaron, have you seen like somebody specifically either get demonetized or lose a channel for a take on, you know, questioning IPCC or something like this, or being called science denier?
That's funny because I was thinking to myself here, listening to everything, I was like, if I say anything, it's going to be a major buzzkill, like, back to energy. But, but actually, I would say it's even more ingrained, even in the science of it, because like the IPCC report, everyone is familiar with the hockey stick, I think, if we're having this conversation. Do you know that there are other takes on that? And do you know that the IPCC itself eliminated these other views? And the reason was it diluted the story, and I think that's a direct quote. So it might not be individual, although, I mean, I'm sure there are examples.
Or what about censored at the university level? Like taking funding away?
Yeah, funding, of course, and then I would even take it to industry, because now you are seeing limited access to capital to companies who don't conform with the ESG sort of movement. And you see the private equity firms come out and say, we have these requirements, you need to take action in these 15 ESG categories or we won't lend. So it has they're multifaceted.
So it's implicit, like in the policy, that that's what it is, and if you're not, you're a denier.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, what do you think? I mean, if you want to get climate change, like if you want to get climate change, you want to solve it, right? And I want to talk about like what we could agree on, like on specific policy, but to not have like somebody else that says, you know, I think your theory's bullshit. I want to pursue research over here, and then just get it knocked out. Like you got a blinder on.
I mean, these are like three very, very, very different topics. So the idea of censorship on large social media platforms, there's very good arguments on both sides of that for the problems that exist there. The difficulty in pursuing certain types of research, like the entire job of writing grants and trying to get funding for certain types of research is a huge pain. That's a whole conversation. And then like the actual conversation of should we do something about climate change itself is also like a whole conversation. I think it's tempting to mix up all three of these, but like I said earlier, anybody that wants to sell you one grand narrative to explain all of life's problems, I think is always selling you snake oil.
Okay, where do you want to see? Like, if you feel like the culture waits on the other side, like where would you compromise on climate change policy for America? Like, I mean, Biden's plan, what parts do you think might work, and what hills do you want to die on?
So I may take a slightly different angle on that because, like I mentioned, I sort of disagree with the premise, at least the one that's stated in these documents we're talking about here. But what I recommend? What do I think we could do better?
Well, like, for example, like electric cars, right? If they are, in fact, more efficient, like pound for pound on energy, doesn't that make sense to just from a basic conservation, like better light bulbs?
I think then the consumer would make that choice. But one thing on electric vehicles to keep in mind, and I think maybe it's well understood now, but the electricity still comes from somewhere. So that still involves generating electricity to run those vehicles and to manufacture them, and et cetera, et cetera. But where do I think we could make improvements? So I think if we're talking infrastructure, we could bring in the pipeline and energy transportation piece. This is a place where I think the government maybe, or the U.S. in general, could do better because our refining system is quite outdated. And these days we're producing, without getting into too much detail, we're producing a lot lighter oil than we used to. And our refining system is so old that it's not really set up to process that type of oil. So we could definitely retrofit that. And that's when you start to get to energy independence, because we're crude oil because of the type of oil that it is really in order to run our refining system. So refineries, pipelines, I think these are good investments for the U.S. And like I said, I think nuclear is a good idea. So.
All right, what do you guys think? Where are you willing to compromise your position? Where do you want to cross the aisle with the other side? Like what do you see as the best? Like, what should Biden do to try to get enough Republican support to get his bill passed?
These are complicated questions. In terms of now you're asking a political question. The easiest way to sell it politically is jobs. We're going to create a lot more jobs if you allow us to do this, this renovation. There's going to be a lot of federal money. There's going to be a lot of contracts on the table. There's going to be a lot of job creation that happens as a result of that. I think that that's the way forward politically to sell it to Republican voters.
I don't think Biden is going to do anything regarding the environment or anything to reduce oil because he takes oil money. So that's just the bottom line. What I think people should do is try to find ways to conversate as to how when we look into new ways of energy production, to minimize the use of oil in all ways except those that are needed to create new energies. I think that's something that we need to come to terms with. I think it's something that a lot of the left needs to come to terms with in terms of to pretend that those new energy, those new energy productions do not at all have anything to do with oil. That's disingenuous, and I think the more honest they are about admitting it and finding solutions and talking to people, there's going to be that aspect. But I reject the notion that all of these topics are separate. All of these topics, whether you're talking about the censorship, whether you're talking about climate energy, whether you're talking about the privatization of our environment, it's all interrelated because it's all the product of the system that we're in. And if people aren't allowed to question, if they're not allowed to have discussions and to figure things out on their own, if they are just told what to think, that is dangerous, and we're never going to find solutions. The solutions are going to be found for us and pushed by these really powerful people that all they want to do is privatize energy, privatize the environment, and get away with just doing what they want to do for a very small percentage of people. I think it's terrible to think that none of these things are related. Everything is related, and in order to find solutions, we need to have conversations like the ones we are having, because there are things that I don't know that she just pointed out that are really, important in understanding the actual technicalities of what's going on in that industry.
Okay. Before we start to line up for Q&A, nobody's talked about cows. Not at all. I mean, the University of Michigan has told me that in order to make Biden's plan a reality and be able to hit the goals that they need to goal, that 90% of red meat consumption in the United States got to go away. I mean, is that just a fun thing for the New York Post to put in their newspaper?
I mean, animal agriculture drives a decent amount of greenhouse gases, but I don't think it's that much that it would be that significant. Like, I think automobiles alone, although that includes shipping stuff, I think is like 35 or 40% of all greenhouse emissions in the United States. I've done a lot of like vegan arguments and everything. I'm personally not a vegan. I don't think cutting 90% of red meat consumption is like needed to me.
Yeah, I think that was
that's...
one of their ways that they said they could get there.
Oh, maybe. I
Yeah,
don't even know if that
Again,
alone would do it. I'm not sure.
Again, there's a cost benefit there. Like, it's not just cut 90%. And your numbers are accurate in terms of the contribution. It's low from methane, which is what we're talking about in terms of cows. And then it's like, does it move the needle? And what's the cost of that? And so I think it's silly.
Yeah, because it seems to me you got to weigh against a significant social cost.
Yeah, and this is something that people are really bad at sometimes, and you see a lot of big pushback sometimes when you make these huge moves to get rid of, like if you're in California, you've seen like the paper straws, and you get the push towards some of these things, and the overall impact is like almost negligible at the end of the day. And it's just an annoying thing to deal with. And then this is like something that everybody feels the annoyance of. And when you talk about climate stuff, like any potential reward that comes from drinking out of a horrible paper straw is going to be like 20 years down the line anyway. So I think it's good that you only have so much attention span or drive as a person to fixate on a certain topic, and even the government, you only got so much political capital to target certain areas, so you should probably focus on your big drivers that have more realistic outcomes. This is one of the reasons why, for however you feel about carbon or contributing to global temperatures, carbon trading is a system that when implemented has real effects and does move the needle on how corporations like move around carbon and how they pollute. Banning paper straws or telling everybody to not eat red meat is not realistic. It's just not going to happen anytime soon.
We banned straws so that billions of masks could end up in the ocean.
I'm a vegan.
They seem to not care about that.
I'm a vegan actually, but I don't think banning meat is the solution. I think the way it's farmed, the way we do agriculture here is a really big issue that people aren't really looking into. And I think if you go to other countries, if you go to Europe, the level of meat and produce that they eat there, some of our products aren't even allowed to be imported in these places. It's about the health. I think I don't think you need to say, oh, we're going to ban meat or we're going to cut the 90% of meat production. I think it's how you are doing it. And is it sustainable? Is it good for the environment? Those are conversations that need to be had.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yes or no question for the panel in regards to large corporations using their influence over the energy sector and policy as well as censorship. Should we utilize the Antitrust Act to correct that matter?
Hell yes.
Yeah.
Who wants it?
It's a really scary world when we talk about like using antitrust to break up social media companies, because it's hard to know what things will look like after. It's hard to know what things should look like after. I don't have like a quick and easy answer, but like, I mean, all of these platforms it seems like there's always going to be like too far on one side. You're either going to have like people spreading insane conspiracy theories across social media that get a lot of traction that end up being harmful, or it seems like you're cracking down too much on certain conspiracy theories and then you end up catching like some people that shouldn't be caught in the filter. I don't think you're ever going to end up in an area where it comes to policing these kind of online social medias where everybody's happy, so you kind of have to figure out like what harm is acceptable to you and like what are you willing to I guess accept at the end of the day. I wouldn't be in favor of using antitrust to break up, I don't think, social media.
I would say absolutely yes, and the people that are spreading misinformation right now have been the government, have been mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, Fox. Every single one of them has spread conspiracy theories about Russiagate, conspiracy theories or kept stories in secrecy, like the Hunter Biden Burisma story, or about elections. You can't even talk about elections. You can't talk about ivermectin or COVID. I think the people that are worried about misinformation are those actually spreading it. And I think it's not up for any of us except ourselves to judge what is true and what isn't. I am a free speech absolutist, and I think we need to go back on the left. If you consider yourself on the left, you need to go back and start embracing the freedom of people to think for themselves.
Just on that topic, as it's been brought up a couple times, if you care about media literacy and you ever want an appreciation for the mainstream media, taking any amount of time to read through any alternative media will instantly increase your respect a millionfold. You can make fun of CNN or MSNBC or even Fox News all you want, but compare it to the insanity that is the alternative media on social media, which it sounds like, based on how many times I've heard you say Russiagate, it sounds like you're probably a little bit in those circles. The veracity in the reporting.
Russiagate was debunked.
What is Russiagate?
Russiagate?
I don't even know what Russiagate means.
Okay. Well, look it up.
Destiny, what's alternative media? I got Will Chamberlain staring at me, wondering
the people like the O'Keefe, the Project Veritas fans, where you can go and you can watch like their videos, you can see like the results of like all of the stuff. It's like all bullshit.
Veritas?
Weapons of
single
mass destruction were not bullshit either,
Every single thing that James O'Keefe touches reeks of bullshit. And for anybody with even an ounce of media literacy, it is so incredible. The Planned Parenthood, the Project Acorn, literally every single, you can just watch the videos. When he approached the Washington Times reporter and tried to make it seem like he was running away from him, and WAPO posted the full video, and you saw that it was actually completely misrepresented.
It's all propaganda. It's like, this is what we're trying to do. This is the narrative we're trying to craft. That's
1,000,000%. And then to say things like Russiagate is conspiracy, and then talk about like the sex tapes of Hunter Biden, which we're talking about the most. Talk about the biggest.
I was talking about the money.
Talking
money.
about what money?
The backing and arming of neo-Nazis in Ukraine that people weren't allowed to talk about. That's
Ukraine,
what I
that was the same country where Trump withheld the aid because they wouldn't politically
the United
pressure.
States armed and backed neo-Nazis in Ukraine.
So like, if you actually like read through more than just the headline, I think that the biggest appreciation of mainstream media you'll get will come from there, because oh my god,
mostly peaceful.
Sorry. Alternative media is garbage. I'm sorry, but it is.
Was it alternative media that sold an entire war to the American people under false pretenses?
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
I mean, in some cases, yeah. I mean, what wars you want to talk about? You can find alternative media supporting literally anything.
When they lied, there's zero accountability
there
for them when
absolutely
they
is.
lie.
Heads roll when people lie in
Really
mainstream media. There are people.
Who's one person who's ever been held accountable, especially over the last couple of years?
Over the stuff relating to the head editor of CNN's with the
Julian
reporting the stuff
Assange
on.
is in prison right now for exposing U.S. war crimes, and you're telling me that CNN and MSNBC are held
We can have a
accountable.
Right, so
whole
we've just-
conversation on Julian
I know,
Assange if
we're-
you want, but okay.
Green New Deal just got crossed out. Integrity of media got put in. Next question.
I'm wondering how much our liberty should be restricted. The governor of Iowa has proposed that all gasoline or fuels sold in the state of Iowa be bio. You have no choice in that. Very little mumbling about clean air, but it'll raise the price of corn. I mean, how much of this should we accept that would restrict our liberty as far as what we want to eat, what fuels we want to put in our vehicles? Do I want to burn up my 1988 Lawn Boy with gas that runs too hot?
I mean, we accept restrictions on all sorts of things. We already accept restrictions on the types of foods we can eat, on the types of gasolines and fuels that we can burn. There are plenty of ways you can get around these restrictions now if you want to legally pollute, and in some states you'll get in trouble for it. I mean, the problem is that pollution is something that affects everybody around you, whether we're talking secondhand smoke or whether we're talking about burning a really dirty fuel for your car. The idea that it's like some horrible thing to have some responsibility as an American to your fellow neighbor to make sure that you're doing things that are healthy for
But is
everybody around you.
CO2 pollution? Because, I mean, I think what he's talking about are biofuels.
I'm talking about the price of corn and subsidizing the Iowa corn growers under the guise of green.
Sure. I was responding more generally to the last question. Pushing 100% biofuels, I don't know anybody that's seriously proposing that. I'm sure there might be some Iowa state legislator that's doing it, but I would be shocked if that went through.
Anything to add over here, Aaron?
I would just say, how much should you accept if you see a value out of it? You should be getting something for that. And, again, for me, it comes back to the premise, I guess. And I don't mean that it's the same premise across the board, but that should be looked at. Like, is it a legitimate reason, and am I getting something out of it, or to evaluate whether it's worth it, I think.
Okay, Dan, go ahead.
I hear a lot about all the new green jobs that will be created, but I recall when Spain did their green energy push for every green job they created, they lost 2.2 jobs. Is there any data on whether these new green jobs will be a net loss or a net gain?
Is there?
Yeah, I don't have that data, so I don't know if anyone else has even seen that. I think it's still left pretty vague, and then I would just say that, especially when you read the Green New Deal, it talks about mobilization, this, and then jobs comes up as a real concern, but the energy industry employs 8 million people. And then you say, I mean, there's varying estimates on the other neighboring industries. For example, when you're driving down the road in West Texas, there's a gas station and there's a restaurant, and these things are there because energy development is there. So it's more far-reaching than that, let alone the point that I made at the beginning that every industry is enabled by it. But in terms of jobs, there's a tremendous volume of jobs that are enabling everything else we do. I don't know whether there's a one-to-one replacement or less than that or more. I don't even know if there's a proposed number on jobs on the green side.
I think when something is vague, you usually know what the answer is. It means you're going to get screwed.
I mean, there's probably going to be a net reduction of jobs, but that's probably true of every new push into the future. I mean, even when we look at the jobs that we have in manufacturing today, like, we can bring back certain, Trump tried this. Trump tried bringing back certain manufacturing jobs to the U.S., but it doesn't work because what happens is as jobs become more automated, you get higher educated people that fill out, one person will do the job that 10 people could have before. In terms of, every new green energy job we have, I doubt that there's going to be a one-to-one replacement from fossil fuels, but that's just the reality of it. Even in fossil fuels, there's not like this massive job creation anymore. You just have maintenance of prior jobs. We didn't get to talk about it now, but for instance, like the Keystone XL Pipeline, people sold that as like American jobs. I think the end of the day, the estimate was there were like 36 Americans that were needed for like the newly proposed line that was going to connect through Nebraska for that. It was 36 jobs. It was 36 jobs.
You buying that, Aaron?
No, it's on the order of thousands, but it's more far-reaching than the jobs, I would say, for Keystone, and that gets back a little bit to the refining system and things like that. But I think it's also inaccurate to say that the oil and gas industry or fossil fuel industry or energy industry in general is not generating any new jobs. It very much is related to supply and demand and the growth of the industry, but also the technology. So one thing I didn't get a chance to mention, a lot of the technology that moves over to places, especially like geothermal that's neighboring to oil and gas, and then even in wind, these kind of it requires a high level of technology, and a lot of that comes from oil and gas learnings. So there's value there too.
Yes, the panel touched on it earlier, the link between meat eating, factory farming, fast food on climate change. What would you do to encourage people to make healthier choices rather than engaging in consumption of fast food and other unhealthy choices?
I would encourage people to just simply start by reducing their intake of meat every single day. There are so many new products that you can eat. You do have to be careful with soy products because, again, there is a lot of genetic modification in those products. Like the industry has progressed so much, whether it's vegetarian or vegan, in giving people just substitutes for meat. And I think just cutting down helps. It also, for me, it's helped me feel better, more energized. But I mean, that's an individual choice. I think if everybody cut down a little bit without asking everybody to hate meat or become vegan, I think it would make some inroads.
Yeah, I'm getting all these ads from watching your YouTube channel, Destiny, that's saying that soy is reducing my testosterone.
I don't think that's the case. But
I've always wondered, is that like a real
I don't
thing?
know.
Does that really happen?
That ad, I get that ad all the time. I don't know what it's saying about me.
I saw Destiny had a YouTube video about Little Caesars. Were you saying the fast food was good, or where do you stand on that?
wait, what was the question?
How would you encourage people to make healthier choices?
Oh,
Because
for that question,
yeah.
I mean, I think taxes are a really good way to do it. In the United Kingdom, they have a sugar tax. I think that implementing taxes on certain unhealthy foods to push people towards healthier foods is probably the way to go. I think a lot of people make choices at the end of the day based on what's affordable, so people just buy whatever is cheapest sometimes.
I only have one observation on this topic.
Yeah,
It's kind of funny because it's like, how are you going to make people take a healthy choice? It's like, well, then are they choosing, or are you telling them what to do? And isn't that kind of up to the individual?
Go ahead.
All right, so quick background. In the 40s,
Yeah, a little closer to the mic.
I'm sorry. Yeah, a quick background. In the 40s and 50s, the United States focused on the uranium fuel cycle for nuclear reactors because it produced plutonium for the nuclear weapons program. So at that time, we knew that there was a cleaner fuel cycle for nuclear, thorium fuel cycle. It does not produce plutonium, and as a result, the waste is only hazardous for about 400 years. And we have enough thorium at present electrical consumption for about 2 billion years of consumption. Not only that, the South Koreans, along with the National Laboratory in New Jersey, are developing a tokamak that can do nuclear fusion, and they are planning to build a commercial fusion reactor between 2032 and 2036. So. I don't know. I guess I'd like to hear comments on whether or not that's going to be viable for green energy. It's zero carbon.
Yeah, I know we talked about this last night, Aaron. I asked what you knew about thorium reactors, and it wasn't that much. And I don't know if anyone does.
You'll probably know more. The two, I always hear these two golden child nuclear technologies. One is cold fusion, and the other are thorium reactors. It always feels like they're 5 to 15 years away from like being viable. I don't know if you know more about it, but it always feels like they're not quite there yet in terms of being scalable and everything.
But what if a general question of, shouldn't we, rather than like push money into the current existing green energies, pump it into more research instead?
I mean, I think there's a lot of research happening right now. But the problem with research is, and this is why we use private markets, the problem with research is you don't know what is going to end up being the thing. It's hard to pick winners, you know? Like it might be.
But isn't government subsidies picking winners?
It can be, yeah. But this is why a lot of depending on how you feel about it, like innovation in the pharmaceutical market in the United States is largely driven by private investment, by private research. It's hard for the government to just say all of our money is going here. You're going to be the one that makes it, because it might be 20, 30, 40, 50 years later. It's like, okay, well, this was we shouldn't have picked this technology, so it's not viable on like a larger level. I haven't heard for thorium and cold fusion. These are always technologies that seem like a little bit further away. So I just don't know.
Okay. What you gave me that graph about like all 22% of energy is green, but yet gets 93% of the government investment. Like, what's going to research and what's going to like current?
Yeah, I guess I don't have that level of detail, and I'm not super familiar with the technology side of nuclear. I'm more oil and gas.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't have that further detail.
All right, next one.
Hi, first of all, hey Mike, looking good.
Oh, hey.
I'm glad that we touched on nuclear energy. That's very important. But one thing that's rarely ever touched about, plant factories, indoor vertical farming that uses roughly 90% less water than a conventional farm that produces just as much food. How impactful or how important do you believe plant factories are going to be regarding addressing climate change?
I missed that. What did you say? Something factory?
Plant factories or indoor vertical farming.
Anyone got that?
It's not something I know much about.
Neither.
It's another thing I've seen posts on it, but it always feels like it's like not quite there yet. I don't know.
Well, I'm glad I'm not the only one who doesn't know what the fuck that is.
I think it's a good idea. I've seen it happening more and more. I just don't know exactly the data on how much more effective it would be.
It's very popular in Japan. They produce a lot of food. I think it's like 10,000 heads of lettuce on a daily basis on just a handful of factories. But it's still in its early phases. I mean, we're not at the point where we could mass produce wheat or large-scale crops, but smaller crops, definitely.
Sounds cool.
One thing I can say though is like the water efficiency usage of plants goes up with higher concentrations of CO2. So a lot of these technologies will actually enhance the level of CO2 in order for the plants to become more efficient. So that's maybe now we're going down carbon usage and carbon sequestration, but CO2 is not all bad.
So my question is more public policy focused. What would be the metric of success for a policy? For example, if you have the subsidies, you can pump subsidies all day, but the idea is that you would eventually get market incentives to take over. Like how many years can we say that we would have to pump subsidies? Like at what point can we say that the subsidies worked and stuff like that, or with any policy in general.
Yeah, how long should, are some of the subsidies you mentioned are going away? Destiny,
Something
you're
like that
specifically
is going to
for
be
solar.
like hyper dependent on the policy. So like if you're talking about like a cap and trade system for carbon, that's something that you should hopefully see. You would have to know how long does it take a business to like become more green? Like what is the expected investment of a business to do it? Like for instance, if you put a cap and trade on a company and if it goes green, it takes 5 years to recover the cost. You'd expect to see them do it like pretty soon. But if it takes like 30 years to recover the cost, then maybe they never do it. So it would depend on the type of policy. And then it would depend on what it's being enacted on, and then there's like so many factors. Like to say like what makes a policy successful heavily depends on the policy and like the type of policy it is, I think.
And I don't have an answer, but I think it's the right question. And I think for this reason. I mean, it should be effective, right? We should have some way to measure whether what we put in place does what it says it's going to do.
And what's your measuring point? Like CO2 levels?
I think it depends then, the time scale and how you measure it. But I'm just saying I agree that it's the right question. Like you should have that in mind, I think.
Okay, fair. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is a question for you. Sorry, I'm not sure what your name is.
Fiorella? Destiny?
No, him. Yep. Okay, sorry. So you made a comment about Project Veritas. So I was just a little bit confused because I don't know if you've kept up to date with them, if you've seen the recent story on the CNN technical director, Charlie Chester, and he admitted to that CNN engages in propaganda regularly on video. So I'm just confused as to how that is a conspiracy theory when he's admitted to it on video. And there's a lot of different people who have done that as well. So I just don't really understand how that's a conspiracy theory.
When I'd heard this phrased earlier, it was that CNN prefers stories that are more sensational, which you're literally describing every single media company ever. I personally don't know this particular story because I haven't followed it recently, but Project Veritas is one of the few organizations that I would bet against without even hearing what they've said because they've engaged in so much deceptive misinformation over the lifetime of that organization that I instantly know that whatever opinion they put out, if I take the contrary side to it, I am 100% accurate on whatever I would say. So.
And just...
He's sharing.
With having video proof, like what else more do you need? Do you know what I'm saying?
I mean, like, what was the 100%? What was the quote?
Right, but what I'm wondering is, like, you're saying Project Veritas, you just shit can them right away, but yet this is some of their best piece of journalism, and you don't know about it.
Every piece of journalism that they put out before it gets vetted is their best piece of journalism. And as soon as people start looking into it, it ends up being complete garbage.
I just think it's quite unfair to label something as a conspiracy theory just because they're questioning the current narrative that's going on. I think that that's unfair, and especially if you haven't done the research, especially if you haven't.
So what was the claim? What was the story?
I can pull it out, but basically, so Project Veritas had this girl go on a date with this guy like 8 times, like 8 Tinder dates, and she was collecting video evidence and asking about CNN and things like that. And he basically stated that CNN engages in propaganda. And there's also other video.
When you say engages in propaganda, I need to know.
Uses propaganda as a tool. You can look at the video. I don't want to misquote it. There's also another story back, I guess maybe a year ago is when they really, like, Project Veritas really took off. And they admitted that they used the whole Russia scandal with Trump to basically make him look bad. And they knew that it was false. They knew that it was fake. And CNN has admitted to that they knew it was fake. And so I don't understand how you can...
I don't know when you say the Russia stuff was fake, are all of the Mueller indictments fake?
I'm
are the people that went to jail for
I'm
the
telling
charges
you that
they went to jail for
CNN.
fake?
I'm telling you that CNN. I don't know about that.
I'm sorry, you're not a debater, though?
It's actually misinformation to let you hear somebody's own words in context.
I just want to...
I mean, if I ever heard words in context from James, I would be shocked because that seems to be his...
What do you think? He's like putting words in people's mouths? Like,
I mean, you can go and watch the video. What do you mean? His whole shtick is cutting videos up and taking things
you
out of
may
context.
say, that's not my voice because you don't like how you sound, but it's your voice still.
If you ever get bored, the funniest Wikipedia article is the Project Veritas one because you can go through every single major breaking story they had and you can see that every single time a third party tries to independently verify any of the veracity of any of the story, it all ends up being bullshit. You don't have to take my word for it. As conservatives love to say, do your own research.
Okay, so I've had, like, you can both be critical of Project Veritas, and some of the reporting they've done has turned out to be false. They went into, for example, during the Bernie Sanders campaign, they went into one of the Bernie Sanders offices and were trying to frame a narrative a certain way. Is their narrative usually right-wing? Absolutely. Should you discard it without actually knowing what is being said? No, and the fact of what was said is substantial. It's something that we should look into. It's the fact that a lot of us on alternative media have been saying forever that CNN, MSNBC, all of these same networks regurgitate the same propaganda, the same exact words. I could find videos of them saying what do they say? This is a threat to our democracy. This is a threat to our democracy. Every single news station says the same thing. The fact that they expose something should be looked at regardless of how you feel about them. As a case-by-case issue, I agree that they're not the most trustworthy news organization. However, I think the guy literally said that CNN uses propaganda. So you have to look at it as a case-by-case basis.
And he said their goal was to get Trump out of office, and they accomplished that. Which, I mean, they're kind of just confirming what is clearly obvious, what everyone already knows.
I thought it was the American voters that voted Trump out of office.
No.
Well, I just wanted to say one thing before we take the last question. I thought you were an excellent pinch hit debater, and I thought it was pretty cool. What's your name? All right, thanks, Kaylee. That was cool. You get my thumbs up. Dimitri, you got a question?
I feel like the last question should really address the topic that we were on. Destiny, this is for you, and it's a fun one. So, devil's advocate argument, kind of hypothetical. If humans are adaptable, and if climate change is going to lead to more arable land and places like Siberia being, I don't know, better for farming, whatever it is, and there's a lot of rich people that live on the coast, so those are the people that are going to get displaced anyway, and plants do better with CO2s, is there an argument to be made that, well, you know, even if it is global warming, it's not that big of a deal?
Okay, so I mean, like, believe it or not, our sun could disappear and humanity can carry on near geothermal vents in some manner. Even at that level of catastrophe, we would carry on for some time. Will global warming be the end of humanity? Is it like an extinction level event? Most likely not. I find that very hard to believe.
You are an optimist. Damn.
Conspiracy theorist.
However, I don't think that we generally try to figure like, oh, well, will we go extinct or not? So in terms of like extinction, I don't think, it would take a lot for that to happen. However, it would cause a lot of damage that would make a lot of people a lot less happy than they are now. It would probably cause a lot of war, it would cause a lot of conflict, it would cause a lot of human pain and suffering and death, and that should probably be avoided.
All right, cool. I think we are, the timer's saying we got to get moving. So appreciate it all.
Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed.
You're going to get up on panel, and the person across from you will pull off the rubber mask, revealing that it's actually Wolf again, and the moderator is Lance in a wig. Oh, God.